Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for getting up somewhat early and being here. I see people yawning in the audience already. It's always a good sign. It's a good sign to start off with. No, I'm super excited to be here. I arrived on Wednesday. I was here for the entirety of yesterday. I saw a bunch of talks. I worked for another part of the talk. And you're wildly gesturing. Do you turn up the mic? Or okay. So, right. See you on Wednesday. I think the first day of the conference was amazing. There weren't any keynotes yesterday, so I didn't have a standard to aim for. But they told me I could talk about whatever I want. And they told me that like keynotes are usually non-technical, so maybe like give a bit of a contrast to the rest of the program. So that's what I tried to do. So I thought long and hard about what I was going to present on, because usually when I speak on penetration testing, I speak on red team testing, stuff like that. It's usually very technical. And I was kind of happy I didn't have to do that here. So I thought I would talk about my experiences in the field, because I've been around for a bit, and I've maybe made an experience or two that might be beneficial to others that are working in this field, maybe for not too long now. So I promise there won't be a lot of audience participation in this whole thing. But if we could do this thing in the beginning really quickly and you could all quickly get up for me, that would be really great. You stand up for just a second? Because I want to get an idea of like what crowd we're dealing with. So I know there is a large influx into the industry recently. So I know a lot of you have been around for a while, but some of you are newcomers. So if any of you work in the industry for longer than 20 years, could you please sit down for me? A handful of people, fine. If you work in the industry for longer than 10 years, could you sit down now? All right, still a bunch of people standing. Hello there. If you work in the industry for longer than 5 years, please sit down now. 3 years or longer? Okay. If you went into Infosec this year, less than a year, please remain standing now. Okay, so a lot of people, you can all sit down now. Thank you so much for doing this with me. So you can see there are a lot of people that are new to this industry. There's a lot of fresh blood, and I think that's amazing. But I also think that gives us a lot of challenges. I will skip that because we'll hear enough about me. We're in this constant wave for transformation right now. I actually stole that graphic of the internet, so I don't really actually know what creative destruction means, but I know that there's a lot of stuff changing right now. Even if you look back 10 years, a little bit more, when the first iPhone came out, and you compare how life was back then compared to now, you can see massive differences. People are now walking around with a tiny computer wherever they go. And it's not just techies, it's everyone. Everyone has a computer with them all the time, and they use it for various things. So we're already using it for electronic banking. We're already using it for online shopping. But we're expanding on this now. We're venturing into new spaces that you can use technology with. In Switzerland, where I live, we're currently exploring the idea of electronic voting, which is something that already exists in Estonia, but now we want to do it in Switzerland as well. You may or may not know that Switzerland is one of the few direct democracies in the world. So we don't just vote politicians who then make decisions for us. We get to vote on everything. Like, this is an actual thing. It's in German. I will explain. This is an actual vote that happened just over a week ago, where we got to decide if we should incentivize farmers to have cows with horns. It did not pass. No special submissions. We're not keeping Switzerland horny, I guess. Excuse the bad. It's the worst joke in the whole presentation, I promise. It only goes up from here. But yeah, so you can imagine that moving this democratic process to the digital realm is at the very least challenging, if not, so some people say, impossible. I believe as an industry, it's our job to think in terms of doing things securely, not saying no from the get-go, but it's certainly a difficult task that we're ahead of. And I'm not saying that everything was better before we arrived, like at this stage of this transformational wave. I don't think so. I think we always had challenges. I think there were always problems. If we look at the voting example that I just brought before, Switzerland introduced postal voting 30 years ago. And it has most of the vulnerabilities that you would imply with electronic voting as well. You can go to somebody's mailbox and get their voting slip and sign it and vote for them. So you sort of abuse the system. It just doesn't scale very well, but it's not a new problem. But we're facing new challenges. We need new people in the industry to face those challenges. According to Gartner, Infosec is a 124 billion industry in 2019. We're going to spend 124 billion US dollars on information security. I haven't read the original Gartner report because I'm too cheap to pay money for reports. But one of the key points was that about 10% of that spending is intended for privacy-related activities, which mostly translate to we sort of slept into GDPR, and now we need to catch up with that. GDPR, I'm sure you have seen talks that deal with that topic exclusively, so I'm not going into it. But if you have any doubt that there is still room for improvement with GDPR and that people don't know the bounds of privacy, then I found this story this morning on Twitter. It's about a company called Sleep Number, who builds microphones in mattresses that record audio from your bedroom to find out if you're snoring. So privacy isn't dealt with yet. And GDPR really does affect everyone, more than you would think. I really just wanted to have this in the presentation because it's funny. Merry Christmas. Along with the industry, our community has grown massively. This map is a list of every BSides currently in existence worldwide. And this is amazing to me, because BSides has always been an event that was A, free of charge, B, technical in its nature, and 3, catering to an enthusiastic and excited audience that wanted to learn and share knowledge. And I remember when BSides started. BSides started in Vegas with a bunch of people, I think it was less than 20, who just didn't want to bother running around DEF CON trying to find each other about the shit they were doing. So they rented a house, and they called it BSides, and look what happened then. Now we're looking at this, and we're all here today because we have this massive global movement of essentially free content. I was talking to a friend of mine who works in law recently. They have conferences as well, but instead of free, you pay a lot of money, and instead of knowledge, you get access to papers that you then have to read on your own. It's a very different animal, what we're doing. And we need those new people. We need every single one of you in this industry because we have a lot of challenges. We're not done yet. Sometimes we think that we're making a lot of progress because everybody else is sucking as well. But I've been in presentations where people were trying to convey how well they're protecting their networks, and then like weeks later, I would see them getting owned in the most spectacular ways. Those are usually like conferences like RSA and so on. It's not great. We need new people in the industry. We need more people to help us out. And I'm excited you are those people. I always ask myself why people want to work in Infosec. And I can't answer this question for everyone, but for me, the red button is probably what got me into this. Daniel Cuthbert was doing a keynote at BrewCon, and he has a similar experience, apparently, and he put it very well. He said that a lot of people see the situation with the red button, and they're like, well, there is a red button. Somebody told me I should not press it. There are probably good reasons for that. So it would be a sensible choice not to push the button. However, hackers think a little bit differently because you have all these questions racing through your mind instantly. What is the button for? Who decided that we should put a sign there that says not to press it? What happens if I press the button? What happens if I don't press the button but I press it later? Who doesn't want me to press the button? What happens if I press it twice? What happens if I press it for exactly 47 seconds and then let go? Those are all the questions that raise through a hacker's mind right away when you add like this to the equation. And I think a lot of us have this curiosity mind frame. I don't know where I have it from. My best theory is that I have it from my granddad. He was a TV engineer back in the day, and he was an absolute nerd for model trains. And what I learned from him at a very early age is that it's fine to mess things up, because more often than not, his trains wouldn't run, but he would always find a way to fix it, and I find that somewhat inspiring. He also had some PCs laying around at home. By the way, that's not me, that's just a stock image of the internet. But I got to tinker with technology early on, and I think that's true for a lot of people that got into this field at the same time I have gotten into it. And for me, it was at a very young age. And my excitement for computers only became greater when I discovered computer games. Because, obviously, come on, this is amazing. Small problem, I was about 10 or 12. I didn't have any money. My parents weren't particularly excited about the concept of computer games because I was already not doing my homework, so So I did what every sensible 10-year-old would do. I found some other kids that were older than me that had games and asked them to make copies of those games. This is being recorded, right? Cool. I'll get to that. Problem was that even at the time, there was some very basic form of DRM, or I would rather say ARM, because it's about as analog as it gets. Has anybody seen these? Yeah? So those were sort of like a primitive means of challenge response copy protection. So you got this code wheel with the game, and they would show you like the face of a pirate made from 2 parts on the screen, and you would have to recreate it using the disk, and then you had to enter this number that corresponded to an important event in that pirate's life. I don't know. It's just a 4-digit number. And if you got it right, they would let you play the game, and if you didn't, they would show a little note telling you, hey, thanks for trying, you may buy another game now. Cool. So, obviously, this turned into an arts and craft project really quickly, because what you needed to do is find a photocopier and a bunch of pins to like make your own disk. And I found that more interesting in some ways than actually playing the game, because I was like, this is cool, you can sort of circumvent that. We ended up making an electronic version of the disk to sort of like just figure out if we could. And I checked a couple of days ago, and there is actually a version out on the internet of that specific disk that is powered by jQuery, which I'm pretty sure has more code lines than Monkey Island. So that's cool. So from there, I was sort of hooked on figuring out how things work, so I decided, well, I like playing games, so I want to figure out how to make games. That was a bit more difficult, because our library had exactly 1 book on QBasic. If you remember QBasic, that was a really shitty programming language. But there were like these magazines you could buy at the store. I don't know if you know that or remember that, but back in the day, people bought magazines. And like there were these game magazines that came with a CD-ROM, and they had like this content on there, and there were fan-made games and text adventures. I really liked text adventures because I understood how they worked. And so I tried to make my own. I'm not presenting at E3 this year because I would be a shitty game developer, so that's not what I did, but it was my entrance into like sort of coding stuff. And then things escalated badly. Because a cousin of mine started studying computer science, and he was like, hey, you like how to see how things work? Here, have a debugger. I was like, cool. So I got SoftEyes, which is does anybody remember SoftEyes by NuMega? Bunch of people? Yeah. It was a kernel mode debugger by NuMega that sort of acted as a loader for Windows, so you can debug whatever process you wanted. And for me, that was a revelation. Like, I didn't know what I was doing, for the most part. I got some instruction, it was cool, but like I didn't know what I was doing, but I was fascinated because finally I could see what the computer was doing when I was like interacting with it. And that was for me the entire fascination. But I got stuck really quickly. So I figured out I need more information. So I went to my library, who at the time already had internet access. And that was for me probably the most life-changing moment, because I went online and I found all those people who were obsessed with the same shit I was. Like, there were people who like wrote instructions and manuals and all of that stuff to how to like remove NAC screens from shareware and like how to create a buffer overflow and all of these things that I found so fascinating, and I never found any information on because it just wasn't around. So I had the privilege to meet many people that were pioneers in this segment and that I still look up to today. And that was the part where I was like, yeah, this is what I want to do for a living. This is where I'm staying. So that's kind of what happened. I'll cut this somewhat short. I had my first job in an engineering company I'm not going to name, in Basel. The guy I was working for was an asshole that wasn't actually going to train me, but sold me out for a lot of money to an external company. I told him I wanted more money. He was like, Stefan, the graveyards are full of replaceable people. I was like, okay, bye. And then I talked to a guy I knew from a BBS system, actually, and he had just founded this company a bunch of years earlier. And he was like, hey, we're actually hiring like our first employee. Are you interested? So I was like, so you're doing what again? You're doing like pen testing and stuff like that? And I can get paid to do that? Cool, sign me up. So I did that. I started to work with a bunch of nerds. They don't look like that anymore. It was a good fit because I myself was kind of a nerd. I don't look like that anymore. And it was a good fit. It was fun. Like, we started working on these things. We started growing as a company. We are today less than 20 people, and that is by design. If you want to know why it's cool to have a small company that is sort of boutique level, then go to the evening keynote today that Mario is going to give, because I cut this entire part out of my presentation because he's going to do it way better than I potentially could. So why I'm showing you all this is because I think that my way to end up on this stage here is probably way different from a lot of other people. Even people who entered the industry at the same time have their unique paths. And now we have all these educational options to enter the industry. We get to go to university, and we have cybersecurity-centric courses. We have all these certifications that I think most of them are useless, but nevertheless we have them. There's so many ways into the industry now. And I wish that I had a bit more guidelines. I knew some things before I actually entered and before I actually did. And I want to give you some examples. One of them is a very common problem that I see in information security today is the entire concept of self-reflection. I think a lot of you in this room underestimate yourself. Some of you might overestimate yourself. Imposter syndrome, I'm sure you have heard about it, read about it, is rampant in the information security industry. It's rampant in other industries as well, but it's very popular in our industry for a reason. Imposter syndrome, if you don't know, affects about 75% of all people. The numbers are way higher for women, for reasons. And it's essentially the fear, the psychological fear, that you are indeed not worthy and not able to do what you're doing, and that you are going to be found out to be a fraud anytime now because you have a secret and you don't deserve to be where you are. It's an irrational fear that a lot of people experience. A lot of people, most people actually, at times. And it helps to be aware that this is a thing we have. But then on the other side, we have a problem. Because in information security, this is big, because we are surrounded by very smart people. We have people like FX or Halvarflake in our scene that are wicked smart. Harun Mir did a keynote at BrewCon as well this year, where he said, like, if you're standing next to Halvar, and you think that you are inferior because you don't know as much as he does, that's not imposter syndrome. He has more brains than a small country. And I agree with that. Like, you can't compare yourself to people who have been in the industry for a long, long time, but you can't sell yourself short either. Again, on the other side of the spectrum, we have the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect is this really, really nasty thing that makes people very inaccurate in judging their own abilities. So when you get into a field of expertise, at the beginning you know nothing. And you know nothing because you're new to this. But then you learn some things. And there is this phase in this cycle where you think, well, I think I got it now. I think I got information security down. The problem is, you don't. Because very soon you will notice that, in fact, you were mistaken and you realize how much you don't know. So I think it's very challenging to find your place between selling yourself short and not having confidence in yourself, but also not falling for this particular trap. It evens out after a while, and you get to a point where you're more accurately able to judge your own abilities. The sad thing about this is that this is not happening on a fixed time scale, so you don't know if like this takes part over 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. In fact, there is evidence that it can take very, very long, indeed very, very long, to get over that hill, right? I had to smile at the Unhackable wallet as well. Yeah. And the worst thing is, like, this works. Like, there are so many people who just are like, this guy is amazing. He knows what he's doing. He did an AV software. It's great. Anyway. Communication is a big thing. Communication outside your bubble. I love talking to hackers. I love to like talk about technical stuff, like, you know, details. I loved Steve's talk yesterday about the firewall, the firmware stuff, just because it's exciting. It's like it's techie stuff. It's cool. But in most of the cases, we need to acknowledge that we're not existing in a vacuum. So we need to learn to talk to other people outside of of our bubble. People who run businesses, people who do process work, people who do HR work, all of that stuff. And we need to ask the right questions. For example, why are you all wearing blue hard hat helmets in a meeting room? I don't understand. Maybe that's something we should talk about. But anyway, so you have to acknowledge that while you might hate meetings, they're usually your one chance to interact with people who are in a very different space than you are, and to bring your points across. So one of the things I wish I learned earlier is to properly prepare meetings myself, so it's not a waste of time, and so you can actually get your points across quickly and effective. And sometimes it's hard, because when you talk to people who don't have a security mindset and that are all focused on shipping the product, or all focused on getting some new feature into an app or whatever, it gets annoying sometimes. And where do Infosec people go when they're annoyed, usually? Right, Twitter. So I don't know if you caught this a couple of months ago, the T-Mobile AT incident. We also call it Catgate, no? So what happened there is customer was in contact with the service desk of T-Mobile Austria. They asked her for the first 4 jars of her password for verification purposes. The person was very confused because she has some technical knowledge. She went to Twitter. She was like, you're asking me for the first 4 jars of my password. So that assumes that you can verify it against something, which then assumes that you have my password in clear text. That's like Occam's razor sort of dictates that. And the person here, Andrea, very friendly, said like, yep, that's the case. We need those 4 jars. So Infosec Twitter obviously jumped onto this, and they were like, no, you cannot do this because this is dangerous. And actually it was very respectful at this stage. People were telling them, like, cannot do that, that's not fine. And then Kate entered the picture. Kate is another customer rep. And she was like, well, don't get the problem. We secure all your data very carefully. Don't worry, it's fine. Because that's what Kate is trained for. She's a social media rep. She's not a security engineer. She is not in any way interacting with security, probably, which is the core problem. But she jumped on this and she was like, no, that's not great. People started to get annoyed. People started to explain to Kate that, you should hash passwords. You should salt them. You should store them encrypted. All of that. But Kate was not listening. Kate was getting patronizing, was saying, well, you're saying that if we store your clear text passwords in clear text, they could be stolen. But what if you don't get compromised? Problem solved. No problem at all. Because our security is amazingly good. Now, look, I get that this is funny, and I think it's funny myself, but the problem is that we have sort of this knee-jerk reaction that we are like, well, you're stupid. You don't know how security works, so you are not part of our sacred circle, and you are not worthy of, having a normal discussion with. And what happened after that was actually quite ugly, because people got upset, more upset than they were before. And because Kate wasn't listening, people started poking around the T-Mobile AT network, which is unfortunate. Because, this robot.txt file doesn't look too good. There was cross-site scripting in their amazingly good security, obviously. And a bunch of other things that I chose not to include into this presentation because they were sort of critical. Hey, who is it? Cool. And also, we now have a parody account in Austria. It's sort of Austria's response to Swift on security, so it's Kate on security. Again, I get why this is happening. I understand that it's funny, but can we agree that this is not the best way to solve this situation generally? Yeah? No? Maybe? No. And this is a pattern that repeats itself over and over again. Just a couple of days ago, this happened. Comdirect is a German financial institute. They posted this thing. I will quickly translate it for you. So on the bottom, you see an error message that says it's essentially like certificate is invalid or expired or whatever with the custom text. And above, Comdirect communicated on Twitter, hey, if you're getting this message that your connection is insecure, don't worry. It's a problem on our side. You can ignore this. And I get it. For their reasoning, it was fine because they wanted to maintain operations. They knew their certificate was expired on the server side. So they were like, yeah, we're going to fix this. No worries. I don't think they realize that they're teaching people all the wrong lessons by saying that. But I think that's not really their fault. Again, it's a case of bad communication. They apologized 2 days later. There's no parody account this time, at least. But you can see that the mismatch between the people who have to communicate towards the general public and the people who do the security within the companies are still way too big. We need to close these gaps. What Kate should have done after the first time somebody came and were like, hey, what you're doing is bullshit, is run along, get somebody from the security team and have them take a look at that feedback, rather be safe than sorry and be like, okay, we'll look into this, we'll maybe come back to you with an answer within a couple of days. Could have avoided the shitstorm. But on the other side, it was funny, so it's fine. When you communicate to people, I found the best common language and terminology to use is risk. Generally, that's what tech people and business people can agree on, because risk can be measured in likelihood and impact. Impact can be measured in currency, and that's what people understand. So whenever you can, I urge you to get acquainted with risk as soon as you can and with the concepts that are behind risk. If you can use a framework that already exists to assess risk, even better. There is literally nothing worse or cringy to me than sitting in a room with somebody who's explaining security problems but is not able to quantify the risk that comes with it. Not because it's too high, but because they lack perspective. It doesn't work. Stuff doesn't get fixed. So if you want to get your point across, this is the way to do it. Another thing that I did wrong for a very, very long time is I think I didn't manage to stick to the things I was strong at. And I always tried to sort of be a general practitioner. I want to be able to do most of the things we had to do within our corporate setting. And that's generally a bad idea. If you're an amazing reverse engineer, go and reverse engineer. Don't try to be an amazing web app tester. Don't try to be an amazing red team operator. It's fine to have your niche. But there is one caveat, and that is like, sometimes you don't know what you're passionate about. Sometimes you don't know what you actually want to do in your career. So I'm not saying don't branch out and try new things, but don't invest a ton of time trying to be good at everything that you find, because chances are that you have certain talents and certain passions, and they are not all encompassing. They don't go through all the disciplines that we have in information security. So for me, that was sort of a hard lesson to learn because of the stuff that I explained earlier with imposter syndrome and so on. I always felt that I need to be able to partake in any conversation about any Infosec topic in any context, which sometimes is just not feasible. But again, branch out. And I encourage you to do this very, very actively. So what I would encourage you to do is look at the schedule for today and pick the talk that is most obscure to you. It's probably this keynote, but maybe it's something else. It's the most obscure to you, and the best case scenario is you don't even understand the title. That's really the best you can ask for. And go to that talk and see what it does to you. Because it's amazing what a reaction you can get from your brain when you expose it to things that you have no context with, that you have no prior knowledge with, and that might be something that might be your next big thing that you pursue. So I encourage you to do this. If you don't do it here, at least watch a video of some stuff you don't understand. But if you do it here, be aware, you can go and you can talk to the guy presenting it, and you can ask them all the questions that you didn't get. And then maybe you really get a new field of expertise that you think you could like work in from henceforth. Generally, I think it's a great idea to get acquainted with your own brain a little bit more. Also something I sort of missed because I didn't go to university. Because of the way I came into the industry, that wasn't in the cards for me. In Switzerland, we have a dual model of education. I went in from the practical side. So I never really had to learn how to learn, which is a bummer because our industry contains a lot of opportunities and a lot of demands for learning. So it would be good to be acquainted with that. There is this amazing course on Coursera with the same title. It's called Learning How to Learn. And it's amazing because it teaches you all these techniques on how to retain memories, on how to build new connections in your brain and like acquire knowledge. And this has been a game changer for the way I approach new material. And I've gotten way more effective. For me, this is a bit of a special topic anyway, because I got more or less recently diagnosed with adult ADD, which, you know, gives you a bit of context about certain behaviors that you may or may not have had for years and years before, and gives you also some tools to work with that. It's probably the cheesiest picture I have in this presentation. I apologize. The one thing I would really change if I could do this whole past 50 years again is I would get a mentor way earlier. This field is so amazing because it is young. It's so amazing because those people who built those groups I showed you earlier in this presentation are still around. And when you send them an email with a specific question that isn't particularly dumb, you will most likely get an answer. Like, you can write an email to Fyodor about Nmap, and he will respond to you. That's amazing. So, when we did this thing at the very beginning of this presentation, where I made you all stand up, and you're sitting to somebody who sat down very early in this process, maybe that would be a good person to talk to in the coffee break. Maybe that would be a good contact for you to learn more about a specific topic that you might not be very invested in at this point. I certainly made a lot of progress from talking to people I looked up to, people like FX, for example, who taught me so much about this whole industry that I can't thank him enough for it. And I think, like, we should try to share these experiences. We should try to be kind to each other and give knowledge freely, because we're in an arms race with criminals. We are under constant pressure from business demands and all of that jazz. So I think it's important that we are efficient and effective about this. And look after yourself. We are under this constant stress. Our lives are stressful as they are. We don't need, like, Infosec jobs for that. We are already under a lot of pressure with family, with all these demands. But our jobs tend to be more stressful than a lot of jobs in other industry. I don't think a dairy farmer, despite, like, his election struggles that we looked at earlier, I don't think a farmer has as much stress as the average Infosec person. So I want to plug this really quickly. This is an initiative launched by Amanda Berlin, a good friend of mine. She's on Twitter as Infosys here. You probably follow her, some of you. And she founded this thing called Mental Health Hackers, which is all about sort of promoting awareness about mental health issues that are prevalent in our industry. It's all about dealing with depression, anxiety, stuff like that, and I urge you to check this out. We are all part of such an amazing, unique industry. And despite the fact that we tend to get very defensive about things, despite the fact that we are sometimes very, very cynical about what we do and how we do it, and how other people don't do what we tell them to do, and that's stupid because we know better, right? I've always felt like the security community was a family to me. And every time I come back to a BSides, and I've never been to BSides Lisbon before, I never made it out, but every time I come back to a conference like this, it's like coming home to a group of friends. And you talk to people like you know them for forever, and you get so many new ideas, so much more new inspiration. And I think that's our greatest asset. That's what keeps us sane. That's what keeps us inspired. That's what keeps us going forward. So, thank you so much for giving me your time this morning. Thank you very much for listening to me ramble for the better part of an hour. I hope you can go and get your coffee now. If you have any questions about this, I'm happy to answer them now. Otherwise, I'll be around for the day. But keep hacking, keep being awesome. Thank you, BSides Lisbon.